that's an interesting way to give a fella a bid, but he does good work. We're going to be in Psalms 84 tonight. You notice that I gave you another sheet each week. Oh, man, who put that back there in that window? I got to sit there and stare at that the whole time. That's sad right there, ain't it? Oh, man, that's rough. I don't even know what I was talking about. We were, two sheets instead of the normal one. And I should have been doing that all along, but each week in this Psalms class that we took, they would hand out, Roger would hand out a type of a psalm, an explanation of some psalms, and focus on a particular theme, and then we would focus on a particular psalm, because, of 150, you're certainly not going to be able to look at all of them. So with that being said, we're going to be in Psalms 84, but notice the sheet you do have, the idea there of an imprecatory psalm. Now, I'm going to let you read all that on yourself because we just don't have time to go over it, but we did cover that a little bit, and that is when the psalmist would just outright pray for somebody's punishment and just say, hey, I hope God, smoke them. And even the one we looked at last week, remember, he said, erase their name from the book, from the book of life. So maybe that'll help as you study that. I hope so. But, of course, nowadays, what are we to do to our enemies? We are to love our enemies, and we're supposed to be good and treat kindly those who mistreat us. Notice this particular psalm, unlike a lot of the psalms, this one says to the sons of Kohath. There are at least, I have it written down here, there are at least a dozen, I believe it is, of these. Well, I have it written here somewhere, I'll just have to find it. But a psalm for the sons of Korah probably means this psalm was written or authorized or collected by this group of men. Now, remember Korah, part of the Kohathites, they were a particular family that had a certain responsibility. They were Levites. They weren't priests. They were Levites, and they had particular, and there is a distinction there, okay? In order to be a priest, you had to be a direct descendant of, not only high priests, but priests as well. You had to be in the immediate family or descendant of Aaron. But the Levites now, just anybody in the tribe of Levi could do that. And then you had those three, the Merari, I believe, was one. You had the Kohathites, and I can't remember the other one. But they had different responsibilities, such as when the tabernacle moved. Well, when David brought the tabernacle to Jerusalem and made plans to build a permanent one, he assigned these men different functions. And so they had different things that they would do because they wasn't going to be moving anymore. So they would do various things around, guard duty, things of that nature. And he assigned them that. Notice also in your superscription, remember the superscriptions are old, but they are not what we would call inspired. It says to the chief musician upon Gittith. Now, most people believe that is talking about a particular instrument, a viol, some kind of instrument that was from the city of Gath, which was, interesting enough, a Philistine city. So, we might do that if we used instruments today and we wrote a psalm or a song, with a banjo or something, might put that in there. But this is in Book 3. The Psalms are divided into 5 different books, and this psalm is the beginning, or actually Psalm 73 to 89 is Book 3. This particular psalm we're looking at is one that is called a Psalm of Confidence. A Psalm of Confidence. And it breaks down pretty simple. There's a couple of good what I like to do. I like to outline a particular chapter. I like to outline a particular book. And the one that's helped me is a fellow by the name of Phillips. First 4 verses, dwelling in the sanctuary. Dwelling in the sanctuary. And each, you have 3 stanzas. This remembers a song. It has 3 verses, if you will. You often wonder if, the song leaders would hold up a finger if they were going to skip a stanza. It has 3 stanzas. And they're easy to see because they are marked with the word Salah at the end of each one. And so you can see where one stops and another begins. And an interesting thing about this psalm is that it's a psalm with beatitudes. And each one of these stanzas has a particular beatitude. The first and third ends has it at the beginning or end, whereas the second one starts off with the beginning. So you can see that. It's easy to see. And so one of the things that I want you to think about as we look at this psalm, and this is one of those times where you really wish this was a Sunday morning, that I was preaching this on Sunday morning. I wish I was preaching this on Sunday morning because it's dealing with a man's love for going to the church, going to church. You know, remember, this would have been the Jewish idea of church, you know, as close as it got. And look at how much he appreciates and wants to be a part of that. Notice in chapter 84, verse 1. This is King James now. It says, how amiable are thy tabernacles. Well, I hope I've got some water up here. I do. Pardon me. Walker, if you were to just take a wild guess, how many hours would you say we've sang this weekend? Okay, somebody with a whole lot more hours than that. I would think it'd be a lot longer. I thought we sang an hour and a half that first night. Oh, I'm just out of my voice. But man, beautiful, loved it. But how amiable. Amiable, if some of you guys with the newer translations, you already see the alternate, or what we'd probably use today, and that's lovely. How amiable are thy tabernacles. And I thought it was pretty interesting. The New American Standard comes out with dwelling places. How lovely are your dwelling places, O Lord of hosts. Everybody sticks with that because it's a technical name for God. And you can see it's Yahweh. It's Yahweh, Lord of hosts. And the idea of host there is the same idea that, you know, James says that God is the God of Shibioth. Well, he's not talking about the Sabbath. He's talking about the hosts, the armies, those that move forward. And that's the idea here. How amiable are thy tabernacles. And some of them, New American Standard has dwelling places. New King James has tabernacle. And some folks have looked and said, well, if this is a Davidic psalm, and he's writing this, why would he pluralize that? And so you can see Brother Roger. I need to put Campbell with that instead of, because when we think of Brother Roger, a lot of times we might think of Comstock. Brother Campbell, if you notice on there, he says plural, number 2 on 2. It says show, possibly to show that it was made up of more than one compartment. And I think that's probably a good answer. That's one that a lot of the commentators try to look at. Why is this plural? There was only one tabernacle during that time. Why would they say more than one? But I don't think that's the deal there. I think it's talking about, or just where God is. This word amiable, it's kind of interesting that the King James translators would translate it amiable, because it appears 9 times in the King James Bible, and it's always translated lovable or most loving, well-beloved ones. And so I don't know why they didn't go with that. Remember, once again, that's something I've always got to keep in the back of my mind. When you're reading the King James, you wonder why they went with a particular word. A lot of times it had to do with readability, and by that I mean audible. It was made to be read. In 1611, Gutenberg had the press thing going already, but I believe, but not everybody had a Bible. So the King James was written to be read out loud, and that's one of the reasons they have the the cadence and so forth of it. And notice the writer's emphasizing the glorious experience of praising God. He says, how lovely are thy tabernacles, O Lord of hosts. Verse 2, my soul longeth, yea, even fainteth, for the courts of and there's God's, the tetragrammaton again, the Yahweh, God, Lord, Jehovah, as the American Standard would put. My heart and my flesh crieth out for the living God. Remember, we've run across this heart and flesh. We've run across that before, and that all he's saying there is my entire being. Everything that I'm made up with. In other words, it's not just a social, it's not just a mental thing, but it bothers me physically when I can't go to church, so to speak. See, David, it's believed, is in a situation now where he's been to the tabernacle, but now he's got to leave, possibly being chased, by either Saul, or he's being chased by his own son. But for some reason, he's had to leave. He could be out on a campaign, for all we know, on a war. but he can't get back there, and so he's talking about that. And notice, it says, my soul longeth, yea, even fainteth for the courts of the Lord. I would just like to be able to go to the tabernacle and be there. One fellow said, the soul cannot be fully satisfied without God's presence. Augustine, a 4th century theologian, said, our hearts, O God, were made for thee, and never shall they rest until they rest in thee. And Burton Kaufman, who's a member of the church, has an excellent commentary series says, there is a deep and unquenchable thirst in the hearts of all men for the knowledge of God. It's there. You can't get away from it. We're created to worship something. We're either going to worship the God of heaven, or we're going to find something. A lot of people say, I don't worship anything. I'm an atheist or whatever. Well, then you worship yourself. You worship your own being. I thought it was one of the things, if you want to do a devotional type study, if you want to get emotionally involved with a book, Charles Spurgeon's work on it's called A Treasury of the Scriptural Knowledge of David. If you got eSword, it's free. You can just download it. It's beautiful. And not only does he give you his commentary on every one, but he brings in vast quotes from people throughout the ages that made comments, beautiful comments about the psalm. One of them here says, in David's case, there was a holy love sickness upon him, and David was wasted with an inward consumption because he was debarred the worship of the Lord in the appointed place. In other words, David can't go, and it's causing him grief. It's causing him emotional stress, which is even affecting his body. It says, my heart and my flesh crieth out. We've already talked about the idea of that just being the whole man. And then a comment that I've made, it says, it is truly amazing how some can make such feeble attempts attending the worship service of the local church. And then some don't even try. Some folks do not make it. We'll have a service here. We'll have a gospel meeting. There are members of the Lord's church who will not make an effort to try to be here and in any form or capacity. Sometimes, most of the time, folks will try to be here on Sunday morning, and I suppose we should be thankful for that. But as far as all the other things that go with assembling together and trying to be Christ-like and trying to encourage people and uplift people and, keep folks faithful and the whole idea of just encouraging each other to love and good works. And we have some folks who just, I'm afraid that if there were bars placed on the front of the door and we were no longer able to come in and assemble, I'm not sure it'd bother them a lot. If it would, if it does, if it did, why are they not here more often? How much do we appreciate the fellowship? One of the things that the theme of this year's CYC, and boy, they really played it well, and it's a great theme. And it was identity. What is your identity? And, one of the things I've always loved, and I know you've heard it before, is if charges were brought up against you, let's say next week that the Congress passes a law and it's illegal to be a Christian, and they come and they arrest you and they bring you before a judge, would there be enough evidence for a conviction? Or would they just look at you and go, well, on Wednesday nights they like this show, and then on Sundays nights it seems like they're always here. It seems like they go on Sunday mornings occasionally. Would there be enough evidence for them to, give you an indictment? Would they arrest you? Rather than our identity, Christ should be about who we are. The church should be. That's our essence. That is us. Notice verse 3. Yea, the sparrow. He's going to talk about birds now. The sparrow hath found an house, and the swallow a nest for herself, where she may lay her young, even thine alders. Now that's kind of strange, isn't it? Here we are wanting to talk about being in the tabernacle and how much we long for it and how much it means to us. Think about what he's saying, though. He's going, the birds build nests around the tabernacle. He's envious of the birds who build their nests in the area. He wants to be there. He thinks how privileged they are because they're there all the time. And then he closes that out with, O Lord of hosts, my King and my God. Verse 3, the birds are privileged because they get to be near God. Notice verse 4, blessed are they that dwell in thy house. They will be still praising thee. That's the end of the first stanza. The idea of those that are there all the time. Well, who would be there all the time in the tabernacle? Well, I believe he's talking about the priests and the Levites. I think he's talking about the men who that's their job. They don't farm and then give a tenth of their stuff to support the Levites. They are the Levites. They're there all the time. That is their job. Brethren, I'm going to tell you something. Besides the people I work for and serving God, the most appealing thing about the job that I have is being able to sit down and to open up my Bible, and that is my job, to study that Bible. It is a blessed privilege. And I can spend 20 hours on a sermon, and have on some, spent more on some, less on others, obviously. But to be able to do that and have the resources and have the support to be able to do that, it is a tremendous blessing. And one that from time to time I have to remind myself, hey, this is what you do. Because sometimes you can get so busy doing church work, doing this, going here, running this errand, and you forget, what it is that you're supposed to be doing. And it's a blessed privilege to be able to just open up your Bible and to study. But like with every job, if you've got a job where you got to sit down a lot, sometimes it can get old. Patty, does it ever get old looking at those loan applications? A little bit every now and then. Yeah, it's sometimes you can, and you've got to rekindle that fire. And one of the things, though, boy, you'll find yourself when you're doing a study like the Book of Psalms, you are not going to have to dig too deep to find energy, and because it's exciting. Here you have people who are talking about the deepest part of themselves, and they're saying, man, God's great. I love God. I wish I could spend more time with God. And that reminds me, hey, that's what I do. He says, I'm envious of those who are working in the house of God, if you will. Now, back then, of course, that was an actual physical place. Here, of course, now it's not. But the church is made up of God's people, and so being able to spend time with God's people, that's a tremendous blessing. And, of course, we said this is the first of three of the Makaros. If you were to look this up in the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Old Testament, you would say it's the same word that Jesus uses in Matthew 5, 3, 6, 4, 5, 6, etc. When he says, blessed are those, it can also be translated, happy are ye. Happy, blessed. It's a wonderful word, and that's the blessings of this psalm. And one of the things he says, you're thinking about those folks who dwell there, is they never have to long for being in God's house, because they're always there. And see, that's where it gets sticky, and that's where I think as preachers, we've got to be careful. As church workers, as folks that, if you spend a lot of time in the church, and if your kids, that's one of the things I love to see. When you see children running around the church building, they're just as comfortable as the day is long, because they know this place. They've been here since they're this tall. This is where they live. They're here every time the door opens. They're comfortable here, and that's a great thing. It's a terrible thing when children come into a situation like this and they're foreigners. You know what I'm saying? They're like, well, can we talk in here? I love seeing people, visit for the first time or something. I know I can't remember what funeral it was, but we had some folks come in, and they wanted to see the baptistry, because they'd never seen a baptistry before, and I kind of got a kick out of that. But people don't know how to act. It's the environment is strange to them, the classrooms and so forth. It's like, and it's so blessed to have your kids who are so comfortable here, because this is a second place to them. With that privilege, though, you got to be careful, because you can get to the point where it doesn't mean anything to you. And, you just treat this like you would the gymnasium at the school, or the rec room at the YMCA or something. So it's a difficult, you might say, well, it's just brick and mortar. We don't have to behave a certain way. Well, let's also remember, this is built with the Lord's money for the purpose of the Lord's church to assemble and use facilities and things of that nature. So it's a little different in that way. But let's don't ever get complacent. Just because, and that's one of the things, Brother Jenkins, who's one of the preachers there this weekend, he basically MCs it, I guess you'd say. He runs a blog. It's one of the, called the Jenkins Institute. It's interesting. If you ever want to Google it, they put stuff out there all the time. Preachers, it's for preachers and things, but, anybody would benefit from it. But he was talking about, and we got to be careful as preachers, because you know what? Next Sunday morning, I've got to preach. And I've got to have a lesson to preach. Sunday night, I've got to have a lesson to preach. Wednesday night, I've got to have material. I've got to make sure I know what I'm talking about. And if you're not careful, you can just get to where you're just accomplishing a goal, and you got things to say, and we got to be careful with that. So let's don't be complacent just because we're comfortable. Sometimes with the level of comfortness, we have a tendency to abuse that. Well, we're in this next stanza. My favorite of all the outlines I looked at was drawing on the strength of God, verses 5 through 8. Blessed, there's that word. Blessed is the man whose strength is in thee and whose heart are the ways of them. I thought this was interesting. Notice the New American Standard translates this, how blessed is the man whose strength is in you and whose heart are the highways to Zion. And then the NIV even took it, of course, remember, they're not so much into word for word as they are the idea. And the last part there, they translated, in whose hearts are set on pilgrimage. Well, I think that's a stretch. I think that's pushing that word farther than the Hebrew would. But it's not a bad idea, the idea of the turnpike or the freeway, or whose idea, this is what makes them go. The ways, highways, ASV, ESV, and ASB translate that it's a thoroughfare. It's the idea of going. This second beatitude is given at the beginning of the stanza, unlike the other two, which are at the end. But the idea of merely dwelling in the environs of God is not sufficient. This has got to be something your heart's got to be set on. And that's one of the, falls in line with complacency. And the scene is described in verses 5 through 7. We're going to see people, this is not something we're used to either, but the Jews were required, male Jews were required, or if they could, to go to Jerusalem 3 times a year. And it's a pilgrimage. In fact, the Muslims still have a pilgrimage. They have one they do every year, and it's almost, of course, it's not a command, but they do it. But they just take off walking from Mecca to Medina, and it's a long walk. But in the times, the Bible times, you had these Jewish men that would go to Jerusalem, and they get tired. Sore feet on the road, and the idea, though, is they don't become discouraged. Look at what he has to say in verse 6. Who passing through the valley of Baca. Corey, what you got there in the ESV? It's got Baca, okay, because the word there actually means weeping. And so when you think about verse 4 of Psalm 23, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, the idea is there. You're going through a bad time. Notice, who's passing through the valley of weeping, of a bad time. There is no place that anybody's been able to find any record of a place called Baca. So using this symbolically, if you will, notice, who passing through this valley of weeping, that's how it's translated in the Septuagint as well. They make it well. In other words, they take this journey through the valley of the shadow of death, if you will, this valley of weeping. And yet their attitude is one of happiness. Their attitude is one of encouragement. Their attitude is one of, don't you like being around people like that? Who in the worst of situations somehow hold it together and are upbeat about it, and they don't gripe about it. They're not complaining about it. They're like, hey, we can get through this. Let's make it happen. Those are the people that you want to go through the valley with. And I think the idea is that we ought to be those kind of people. Let's go through the valley. God be for us, who can be against us? We'll make the trip together. And you know what? If we don't make it, well, so what? We'll be even better. We'll be like the Apostle Paul. It'll be better for us if we didn't make it. But if we do make it, at least we can make it together. And notice the idea of the rain also filleth the pools. In other words, you're going to have this overabundance of the things that you need. Of course, water being the greatest necessity. You're going to have water. And you think about passing in the wilderness, not having the things that you need. They're not only making this make it a good trip, make it well, going through this valley of weeping. It's a good thing. So they also make it a valley of good things, of plenty of supplies. The rain also filleth the pools. The idea of their worshiping in Jerusalem is going to be a great thing. They're going to be blessed. And the idea there is the rains they're going to be blessed by God. Well, you remember one of the things, and I always thought this was super interesting. Man, that clock is really messing with me. I guess it just died, didn't it? One of the things that God told the Jewish men. Now, think about the times you live in. People that live in cities, what's around the city? walls. Man, there are bad dudes out there running around, stealing, pilfering, raping, plundering, and pillaging. And so you had to have security. I've even thought about, man, you're a farmer, you're a man, and you're out there, and you see people, you have to be on your toes. You have to be ready because there are armies you might not even know about. Here comes a band of marauders and things of that nature. But do you remember what God told the men of Israel about when they left to go to Jerusalem? What did he say about their places? What did he say about their land? Remember? What did he say about their land? Did they have to worry about somebody coming and getting it? Or stealing their children? Or taking their wives or their livestock or anything else? Do you remember what God told them when you leave? Nobody's going to mess with your stuff. God says, you come to Jerusalem to worship me, and nobody's going to mess with your stuff. And that's in a day and age when everybody messes with everybody's stuff. I just thought that, what a blessing, and what a, you got to believe in that. You had to believe what God said in order to do that. This, the same idea here, Isaiah 35, verse 7, and the parched ground shall become a pool, and thirsty land springs of water, and the habitation of dragons where each lay shall be grass with reeds and rushes. In other words, you're going to be blessed as a result. Notice verse 7. They go from strength to strength. Every one of them in Zion appeareth before God. The idea of being from strength to strength is, rather than being wearied by the trials and the tribulations, it invigorates them to go, and they're built by it, made stronger by the journey that they go through them. And notice every one of them, what's the result of this attitude of going with a good attitude and from strength to strength and we're going to do this, we're going to be good, and everything's going to be good, God's going to bless us. Well, every one of them in Zion appeareth before God. They're going to make the trip, and God is going to bless them as a result of it. Those who trust in God. And there's the key, word again. This is not just a psalm for anybody. You got to have a relationship with God. Notice verse 8, O Lord of hosts, hear my prayer, give ear, O God of Jacob. And, of course, Salah, the idea of probably a silent time or a time to pause for a moment, reflect on what has been said, or some type of musical notation. I kind of like the idea of it being placed there for emphasis, kind of give you a moment to stop, because now he's going to interrupt what he's been talking about here, and he's going to talk about the prayer. Verse 9. This is why a lot of folks think this is written by David, and I believe so as well. It says, Behold, O God, our shield, and look upon the face of thine anointed. Now, who were the Lord's anointed in the Old Testament? Well, we think of Elijah, and you think of some prophets. But real men that had a lineage. Who was that? Like Elijah wasn't a real man. Kings. Remember what David said every time somebody said, Saul's 5 feet away from him in a very vulnerable position, and they're going, get rid of him, man, let's end this thing. And what did David say? I will not raise my hand against the Lord's anointed. So a lot of folks think, David's talking about himself. Look upon me. Don't shine, don't turn your face from me. Look upon the face of thine anointed. In other words, remember me, God. And notice he calls him a shield, because that's going to come into play in verse 11. Notice verse 10. For a day in thy courts is better than 1,000. How many times have you heard that? I love going through these psalms like that, because then you're saying, man, I've heard that 1,000 times. There it is. I had rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than to dwell in the tents of wickedness. I thought it was pretty cool. I was looking at my 1611 King James Version. Well, don't you wish it was a real copy? I've got a copy, but one of the originals. Wouldn't have to worry about the money anytime soon. But the footnote and see, it's dropped. I don't have that in my New King James. I wish some of that stuff they'd kept. But there's a footnote there, and it says the Hebrew literally says, I would choose rather to sit at the threshold. In other words, if I can't even get in the door at the Lord's house, I'd rather sit there. I would rather, and that's a perfectly good, the idea is brought out in English, a doorkeeper. I'd rather open the doors at the house of God than to be in an exalted position in some evil man's house or where the wicked dwell. And so I think all of us can appreciate and understand what the psalmist is saying there. And then in verse 11 and 12, Brother Thomas B. Warren thought so much of this verse that he named a book that he wrote after it. And having spent some time with that book this week, I thought to myself, I probably need to talk about that subject again. We haven't talked about suffering in a long time. Brother Warren's book is about suffering. And he used this: the Lord God is a sun and shield. And, in the beginning of that book, brethren, he just starts laying it out. Young lady loses her husband in a car wreck, or somebody has cancer. Just every bad situation you can think of. He talks about, he lists it. And so you're looking at that, and then he talks about for the Lord God is a sun and shield. And you look at that, and then you compare all these bad things, and you're like, man, how do you even reconcile that? And then he quotes this verse, and he spends the rest of the book, of course, is dealing with suffering and various aspects of it. But he says, the Lord God is a sun and shield. The Lord will give grace and glory. Remember what Paul, when Paul was whatever it was, I love Ofoy Wallace says, that's, he said, I forget the direct quote, but he said something about Paul's thorn in the flesh has been everything from gout to, he was a funny man. And, a lot of folks believe something wrong with his eyes. We don't really know. But what did Jesus say? Paul said, I prayed about it 3 times. This is killing me. And remember what Jesus said? My grace is what? Sufficient for me. In other words, you can get through this. And a lot of people think it made Paul better. Why does Paul say he was going through that? Because of the amount of revelation that had been given to him. And you think about it, Paul wrote half the New Testament practically. If he wrote the book of Hebrews, he wrote over half of it. And because of that, God gave him something that kind of keep him human, if you will. Keep him humble is the idea that I get when I read what Paul's saying there. And the Lord will give grace and glory. You're going to make it through. And there's so many different aspects. That's why when we finish up this book, we have 4 more lessons in this book of Psalms. I would kind of like to talk about suffering some, because it's something I went back, and I can't believe how long it's been since we've looked at it. Because, man, it can get you down. It's physically draining. It's emotionally draining. When you're going through hard times, and to remember that God is a sun and a shield, and the Lord will give grace and glory. You might be in a physical situation. It's terrible. There's pain involved, and it may even kill you. But you got to remember, God's going to give you the grace to go through that, and he's also going to glorify you. You one day are not going to have a body that's going to be perfect. Never get sick, never grow old, never get tired. Don't have to have tests every 3-4 years, You're going to be glorified. God's going to take care of us. No good thing will he withhold from them that walk uprightly. And boy, anytime that I'm wanting to have a pity party, all I have to do is think about folks I know. Think about the next time I go visit my mom or Alice over at the nursing home. Think about the next time you have to go to the hospital. Think about the next time the phone rings and it's a funeral. Somebody's lost a loved one. Then it really puts things in perspective for you. Not that we just need to look around and find somebody in worse shape than we are, and okay, I feel better about it already. But the idea that God is going to take care of me. And sometimes bad things happen to good people. Sometimes what we're going through is a result of what we've done. We've been exposed to something that we didn't know, and we got cancer for it. Or maybe we made bad choices as a child, and we did things we shouldn't have. That Surgeon General's sticker was on there years ago, but we didn't read it. It wasn't anathema like it is now. So, a lot of us will have to pay the price for that. We reap what we sow. But God's going to take care of us. And he's going to give us things. And this one part here, the no good thing will he withhold from them that walk uprightly. Even if you're going through tough times, even if you lost loved ones, look at the blessings that you have in your life. And you can see that God has given us so much. No good thing, no needful blessing will be withheld. But you may still have to walk through that valley. There may be that Goliath that you've got to combat. You're still there. But God's going to help you through it, and it's given us no temptation which we're not able to handle. Notice verse 12. O Lord of hosts, blessed is the man that trusteth in thee. Brethren, trust, faith, confidence. No matter what it is we're going through in our life, it's going to be okay. Usually it's not as bad as we have it, in our minds that it's going to be. But a couple of things I'd like to point out very quickly. Dwelling in God's house. The first beatitude of the psalm talks about living in the house of God, and we tried to bring out the point that some folks aren't too tickled about that. Maybe it would help, brethren, this is a work in progress, isn't it? That, those of us that are here would do more to encourage those who are not here. And hey, missed you Sunday night, missed you Wednesday. When we have a gospel meeting, let's encourage each other to be here and take advantage of the opportunities that we have to be able to spend some time together. And think about the outline, I think, in particular of this as you look at this psalm, because I think it breaks down real well, real easy for you to remember, and has for me. Sanctuary, strength, and service. And think about the psalm that we have, and the God being our sun and shield. Because sometimes you have to be reminded of such things. I know I do. Sometimes when you're going through a difficult situation and you're just like, what's happening to me? Things are falling apart. Well, God is a sun and shield. Where's my faith? I'm going to make it through. It's going to be okay. And I think sometimes we don't put that first and foremost and think about that in our lives. Appreciate your close attention to this and having a look at these sheets. I hope these sheets are helping you, and we'll continue to go through this study next Sunday night. We talked about identity, and I thought it was pretty interesting. Let me see if I can pull this up real quick, as we need to extend the invitation. Well, I'm not going to do it. We don't have time. But going down the road, coming back from Gatlinburg, and there's Hebrew word in front of me. And I'm like, I've seen that before. And I'm trying to think of what here it is on a car. That thing was that tall. A het and a yod. I thought, what is that? And so I got home, I couldn't wait because I thought it was hayah. It is not. Should have had another het. Which hayah is when God said, I am that I am. Is hayah, asher hayah. Well, this is the Hebrew word for life. It's called kai. And you learn something every day, don't you? And I got to looking at that. And do you know Elvis Presley used to wear one of those? And I thought it was pretty funny because he had this little het yod necklace on. And somebody asked him, why do you wear that necklace? Elvis is about as Jewish as I am. And he said, I don't want to miss heaven on a technicality. So I guess he just thought he could cover all the bases, he had even started, David, wear some Jewish symbology, maybe some, come to find out he had a hairdresser that was into Zen. So, brother, we're not going to cover all the bases. There's one way to heaven, and it's not learning what chai means in Hebrew. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. Jesus is how we get there. Jesus has to be the focus. Sometimes when we're forgetting and our attitudes are not what they ought to be, and we're having a bad day, or we're angry with a brother, or we're just angry at the world, remember the Christ. And remember what it is that you're doing here. And remember that it is but for a short time, and that God is our sun, and that he is our shield. And Jesus is preparing a place for us right now, because he's going to come again, and he's going to take us home, and then we don't have to worry about any of this anymore. We'll be praising God, and there will not be any sin or bad bodies or health or any of that, and we'll all be better then. But we have this time we have to go through right now. What about you? Jesus is preparing a place for those that are his. Are you the Christ's? One of those things they kept stressing all weekend was identity. Are you the Christ? Well, that's the question you have to answer. Have I obeyed the gospel? That's how one gets into Christ. That's how one becomes Christ. If you haven't, you need to. And then, what was that word he used today, guys? Y'all help me with this. It was if you already had your identity and you'd lost it, you needed to get it. What was that Brother Jones used? Re-identify, or you remember the word he used? In other words, your identity and what it's supposed to be, you need to get it redone. You need to get it made again, or brought up to speed. Kind of like letting your driver's license expire, I suppose. You need to get it redone. Sometimes, as a Christian, we lose our identity. And There's nobody in the world that ever figure out we were a Christian by the way we were living our lives, and we're not being what we ought to do. Well, God's second law apart. If we'll confess the sin, God will forgive us. And then if we'll walk in the light, He'll continually wash us in His blood. So the invitation's extended. Anybody needs to obey the gospel, just needs the prayers of the church. It was so good to see so many people respond this weekend and say, hey, I need your prayers. I need your prayers. Brethren, the Bible says we're confess our faults one to another, James 5:16. The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man doesn't do anything, so just forget it. Availeth much. Availeth much. We can help you in any way. We encourage you to come. Together we stand and sing.